Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Out of Spec podcast. My name is Francie. Thank you for plugging in with us today. I am joined by my colleague, Max, and we're going to be talking about something that is definitely along the conversation of, is EV charging an amenity or is it a requirement? What are people looking for when they're renting things? We're talking about the recent partnership between Airbnb and ChargePoint. So it's a collaboration aimed at making EV travel even more seamless and accessible. And like I said, treated maybe less like an amenity and more like a requirement for a nice stay with more and more EVs on the road. So let's plug into the details. This episode is made possible by the support we get from Fort Collins Kia. If you are in the market for any electric Kia, not only do they never add market adjustments, they will deliver your car to you anywhere in the 48 contiguous states for out-of-spec viewers. More information in the link in the show notes. Okay, so this is an interesting deal. I can't say I'm super surprised that this is happening, but Airbnb is a huge company, over almost $6 billion in revenue in 2023 versus ChargePoint, more around $468 million USD in 2023. But I have seen Max ChargePoint do these kind of partnerships to get their equipment out there, but we haven't really seen it. I mean, Airbnb totally dominates the whole, renting someone's place out. Verbo is definitely coming up there. I see more and more ads for them, but I got to say, my typical choice, if I'm not going to pick a hotel, is to look at Airbnb.
Yep. It's become a verb. It's kind of like, I'm going to Google something, or I'm going to go in my Jeep, where people refer to an SUV when they say that, right? It's one of these just things that's fixed in an institution, for better or worse. And I know, there's a lot of controversy about people renting homes on Airbnb, buying homes to rent, the haves and the have-nots. We can have discussions on that on other podcasts. But like you said, Francie, ChargePoint, Airbnb, very interesting collaboration. To kind of consumer-facing companies, ChargePoint, I think almost everyone who drives an EV or even a plug-in hybrid or who's rented an EV has probably charged at a ChargePoint station. But they also sell home hardware and hardware to businesses and, apartments, hotels, etc. So some kind of expansion like this, to me, makes a lot of sense.
I agree. And with more and more EVs on the road, there were 1.2 million EVs bought in America last year, 2023, according to Cox Automotive, Kelley Blue Book. And this is now around over 7% of the new vehicle market in the US. And we, of course, have friends and have with EVs and have EVs ourselves. So we know how important it is when you're along your path, you're doing a road trip, or you're, long or short, you're looking for these amenities along the way, not just the DC fast charging, but okay, if my car's sitting overnight, does this hotel have charging? Is there a charger nearby? Does the Airbnb have charging? And we're not the only ones. So Airbnb reported that they saw searches using the EV charger filter grow more than 80% from 2022 to 2023. And California, Florida, Texas, Arizona, Washington, and North Carolina were the most popular states for EV chargers searches in 2023, which I thought was interesting. Those are also some of the states that have seen the most registrations of EVs as well. And then ChargePoint data showed that North American drivers spent more than 79 million hours charging in residential settings in 2023. So there's no doubt that people are looking for this amenity and people are charging residentially. It's the easiest way to charge. It's the slow charging. It's better for your battery than DC fast charging, and it can typically be cheaper. So now when we're thinking about this deal, it really does make sense. So let's get into more of the details. So this is a partnership, right? It's for those EV charging travelers, but also to help these hosts add value to their home that they are renting out. So it provides a discount on various ChargePoint EV charger models, which is important when you think that, that might be a lot of the, maybe one, you're not so sure of the demand for EV chargers as a host, but also there is the cost factor that might be an inhibitor there. So maybe this will drive it up. And so these offers include up to 36% off select ChargePoint EV charger models, 100% off installation services, and then additional $200 discount funded by Airbnb for the first 1,000 hosts that buy an EV charger through ChargePoint. So this announcement was made on May 22nd, so 2 days ago when we're recording this. I wonder if 1,000 hosts have opted in, but I think that I would opt in if I was renting, because I got to think, Max, how much does it really cost as someone, who owns a home, who owns a townhouse, whatever it is, to install like a ChargePoint home flex charger?
A fair amount, and I want to run through some numbers, but first, really quick, let me just set the context of why this is really nice from the perspective of a renter or someone passing through as an EV driver, right? When you've got an Airbnb, a hotel, whatever it might be with level 2 charging, that means you just plug it in overnight, you wake up in the morning, you get your dogs and your kids back on the road, you have a full battery or whatever you set your charge limit to. And that is just so nice on road trips, or even, let's say, a week or 2 week long stay. You get a really nice Airbnb in Nova Scotia or somewhere, but there's not a lot of like charging infrastructure around you. Well, you can use hopefully that host charging setup at their Airbnb. So it's really nice to have. However, it can be pretty expensive, and it's not expensive in the way people think. So the interesting thing about level 2 charging hardware, to get a little bit in the weeds here, is the actual charging part, technically, what we have to say is in the car. Now, you and I are going to use the term charger because that's what normal people think when they think EV charger. They think the thing that plugs into my wall. But if I analogize this like your phone, right, Francie? That wall wart, as we call it, or whatever it is that you plug into your wall and then you plug the USB cord in, that part on an electric car.
The nugget.
The nugget. That's a great name. That part on an electric car is built into the car on almost all modern EVs, which is what's called an onboard charger. So all that the part that plugs into the wall is for an EV is actually what's called electric vehicle supply equipment. So that's just to get the terminology Poindexter out of the way. But that hardware can still be quite expensive because it basically has to take, a high voltage connection, whether hardwired or through a connector like a NEMO 1450 dryer outlet, take that and put it into your onboard charger, which therefore goes into your EV battery. And these cost a few $100s. The ChargePoint HomeFlex one is one of the more expensive units on the market. It's good hardware, but like almost everything ChargePoint makes, it has, I think, a healthy profit margin baked in. And it's, I believe it retails for $699, or at one point it was like $800 MSRP, maybe a bit cheaper now. With this discount, I suppose for an Airbnb host, it would be more in the realm of like $500, right? 32% discount, that's great. The bigger deal though is them covering the install fees, because that's actually the most expensive part of upgrading most homes to having an EV charging solution, because we have to consider you may need a new breaker. A lot of homes don't have a 50 or a 60 amp breaker. And again, nerd details here. If you want to charge, let's say, a modern EV, many of which have 48 amp onboard chargers, enabling 11 kilowatt charge speed, to continuously do that safely, you need a 60 amp breaker because you can only use 80% load continuously. So you've got to install a 60 amp breaker, which many homes don't have. You've got to run the wiring from wherever that breaker may be to the garage or the outside or wherever you may be putting this charging station. And so that can cost in many homes upwards of $1,000 easily. Just in my rental situation, it cost me $1,700 to get someone to do that. Now, of course, this is Boulder, Colorado, more expensive labor cost. I'm sure it can be cheaper in some parts of the country. Some people may not have to have as long of a wiring run, but ultimately we're talking about copper, electrician's labor if you want to do it correctly, or maybe for the electricians at home, you can DIY this yourself and it's a lot cheaper, but it's not trivial. It's going to cost some money. The nice thing is, before this agreement was even made, lots of people don't know, you can get a credit back from the government, a refundable tax credit for installing home charging equipment up to the value of $1,000. So last year, I took $600 back from the IRS off my tax bill because I installed a charger, which was fairly nice. However, if you're an Airbnb host now and you can do this, that's pretty sweet. I don't know if that means you'll lose this tax credit because they're funding the bill for that, how it's going to work. I wonder if there's an upward limit, because like, let's say you have a nightmare scenario home and it's like $8,000 to get some charging set up. Is ChargePoint going to foot the bill for that? I don't know. But I think for a lot of people where this makes sense and is feasible, this could be a game changer.
I completely agree that this could be a game changer, especially looking at the numbers. Of course, Airbnb and ChargePoint made this decision based off of of information that points that this would be a good investment. This would be beneficial for not only the renters, but also the owners. And according to, also, thank you, Max, for that whole everything that you just said. It was very interesting to hear your experience of installation. As everyone might know, if you've been listening to the podcast, I don't have that luxury of being able to install a charger at this point, maybe one day, but it is a big undertaking, even if you can. And it's really cool that also as a renter, you were able to do that. So it gives a good picture of exactly what the heft is and the cost, of course, but it could really pay off because especially for hosts of Airbnb or whatever you're renting, really, through whatever platform. But according to internal Airbnb data from 2022 to 2023, they found that EV charger adoption in a host home adds an average of 2 nights booked on top of what they were already going to book, meaning that listings that offer an EV charger are booked for more nights and generate more income on average compared to listings without an EV charger. So that's pretty interesting. So, offering an EV charger can make a host listing more attractive to travelers, and you can better pay off your bills. So it seems like that is definitely a benefit there for hosts based on that data, and with the incentives, it definitely sweetens the deal, in my opinion. And then I have to think for EV owners, of course, they will start to benefit from this. More access to reliable charging options, especially the overnight charging where you can just wake up, your car is charged, you don't have to go to a charger before carrying on your way along all these stops for your travel destinations. And instead of having to plan your trips around the charging stations, if this was included at basically anywhere that we stay, and we've had more and more conversations on the podcast on questioning if EV charging should really be an amenity like a pool or a gym, or if it should just be included in terms of the way that people are thinking about real estate, because it adds so much value, whether you're talking about a big condo building with a parking garage with EV chargers built in, or something as small as I'm renting out a room in my home that also has EV charging. So I think it really can significantly enhance the travel experience and encourage more people to consider also electric vehicles for long distance trips if this is built in more and more along the way as people travel. So I think it is pretty cool. I think there are a good deal of EV chargers across the Airbnb listing platform. But really, when you compare all the Airbnb listings across the world, I think it definitely is a small percentage. So I'll be interested to see how quickly 1,000 people jump on this offer to get the extra $200, and also how quickly, the installation process goes. I wonder if there's anyone listening or watching as well that is a host, has ever hosted, that, has been considering this. But I feel like they probably might have an EV themselves. But if it's like another property, which of course that gets into the topic of driving up rental costs and property taxes and everything that we're not getting into. But I do think that this is interesting and does add value. But I've got to think that there might be some cons or considerations as well. Max, any thoughts there?
Yeah, well, just quick thoughts from the host perspective. Even with these discounts, I mean, it's pretty sweet, this install offer, if it's really what it seems to be. Still, it is expensive hardware, the ChargePoint Home Flex. So let's say you are a homeowner or a property owner that has the luxury of having a nearby dryer outlet to your garage. It actually could be cheaper to get a $300 charging station on Amazon or somewhere that is still UL certified, make sure it's safe. But this hardware is not that expensive, and then you can run that, and then you can still offer your guests, in many cases, 30, 32, even 40 amp EV charging, which is going to be perfectly fine for lots of people, unless maybe your guests are pulling up in a Hummer EV. But overall, I think it's going to be a really nice attraction. You were mentioning, Francie, this is going to increase the utilization of Airbnbs, right? More EV drivers are going to book them. And I'll tell you firsthand, as an EV driver, if I have the option of booking an EV-friendly, right, hotel or Airbnb somewhere with a charging station I can use overnight, I am happy to pay an extra $20, even $30 a night for that convenience. That's a big deal, because with DC fast charging costs being what they are now, I might be paying close to that just to get that much DC fast charging. And I want to answer the question here because a lot of people may be asking, especially if they're less familiar with electric vehicles, how much will this cost in terms of, just running it residually, right? What's the electricity rate? Well, that depends on your local area. You got to consider time of use. And one thing I really want to think about is also, how this will be figured out, because it's not a big deal if it's one night and people are charging. But let's say you have guests staying for 2 or 3 weeks, then that can be a lot of electricity usage over those 2 or 3 weeks. I think just recently, actually, she had a conversation with my landlady where she realized, oh my gosh, we were splitting the bill on electricity, but my car was using a lot more than she thought it was because cars use a lot of energy to drive. And so, this is a lot of, it's a big consumption thing, and it's something to consider. That said, I think for most of these Airbnb homes, for most of these stays, it's still going to be pretty profitable for the host in this case. I mean, because like I said, I'm happy to pay an extra $20 or $30 a night for that convenience. And so I think if it's done properly, this can make a lot of sense. Now, I wonder, maybe in Airbnb policies, we'll see terms and conditions like, hey, we have the charging station, please use it overnight for, to be considerate. Because when you charge during the day with most utilities now and smart meters, that's going to be a lot more expensive because it's peak electricity hours.
Right. That is an interesting point, is what really will the cost be over time, and knowing some people don't look at their utility bills quite closely. They're just like, is this a number that seems normal? Okay. But really paying attention to what your charge per kilowatt hour will be interesting. And then one thing to note is that these chargers also get added to the ChargePoint network. So it's kind of like you can use the ChargePoint app to find these chargers and locate them and access them. So I do think about, okay, so from the owner point of view, can you optimize the charging? From the renter point of view, how will that interaction be? Hopefully they have a seamless transition, but I am curious there. And then also it makes me think about those cleaning fees with Airbnbs that are pretty exorbitant. I have a bone to pick with cleaning fees. I leave places clean. Why are you charging me $130? But is there going to be an EV charging fee that is tacked on? Hopefully we don't see something like that, because I wouldn't appreciate that either.
That's a great point, Francie. And this is where I think ChargePoint, if they're really smart, could come in and leverage the smarts of their charger. One of the reasons their charging hardware is more expensive is because it's internet connected, it's app connected, it is, so to speak, smart. And so it's entirely possible, I'm pretty sure, with most ChargePoint hardware, for the owner of it to, who has app access, limit it during certain times. So maybe they could make it so you can't use it at certain times, or maybe they can even make it that you have to pay to use that station. Now, I think the Home Flex and most of that stuff doesn't have the NFC hardware to do that. But like you said, with the cleaning fees, Airbnb hosts have no shortage of creative ways to make sure they're maximizing their revenue. So I don't know. There's a lot of possibilities here.
Definitely. I would love to hear from both sides of the aisle here with our audience as well. Have you rented your place? Is this how important is it for you as a host or you as a guest as well to have accommodation? I think we've shown that it is important. And so is it that important to you to attract more guests? Is the data convincing? Is this just another incentive to get EV charging in your home? It could be that. I think that hosts will need to, be educated about the technology. They might need to have to handle some issues that arise with the chargers, or, it does add to their workload a little bit. So hopefully ChargePoint can definitely be a resource there. But I also think about insurance. You're adding this into your garage, maybe. I don't know if that needs to be considered, but I don't think it's as simple as let's install and then walk away. I think there will be a little bit of education.
Because most of the time, insurance, I don't think, will go up, assuming you're compliant with having a GFCI break or whatever it is, the code in your area. But just having an EV charger will raise eyebrows. I know, like in certain neighborhoods with HOAs, which also have their reputations, people might turn an eyebrow at that and be like, what are you doing? So there's definitely a lot of other unaccounted variables towards these installations. So I think it'd be really interesting to hear from folks who actually are having this done. How does it work? Do you pay and then get refunded by them? Do they invoice it? How does it actually work logistically? And what the experiences are like? Because it's one thing for us to talk about this on a podcast with our experience, but this is such a case by case, home by home thing.
Definitely. That is a really good call out. And I'm truly mean this. If you go through this experience with Airbnb and ChargePoint, I would love to talk about your experience with you on the podcast. If you'd be willing, or if not, I can relay your story. We'd love to know all the step-by-step process of getting this done, because hopefully we see more collaborations like this to make EV charging more accessible and more ubiquitous across all of the options for travel destinations. I think it's a really cool partnership, and interested to see how it goes along. So thank you, Max, for coming onto the podcast to chat with me about it. Of course, we'll see what people think in the comments as well. But hope you have a great rest of your day, Max. And thank you, everyone, for plugging into the podcast. We'll see you next time on the next episode. Bye-bye.